Commanders training camp is now right around the corner now that mandatory minicamp is finished. So today, I'm going to be going over 8 potential surprise cut candidates for the Washington Commanders, guys that I think most Commanders fans probably think are going to make the team. And, I'm sure some of the names on today's list would probably make the team, but here are some names that could potentially be surprise cuts after training camp for the Commanders after what we've seen through OTAs to this point. Now, let me know, before we get into today's show, name a player that you think could surprisingly be cut by the Washington Commanders this year. Offense, defense, special teams, who do you think could get cut that many people think is going to make this team? Let me know down there in the comments section what you have to say. Then we get to Armani Rodgers here. I'm going to start with this one because this is the one that I think, Armani is a really talented player, and he could be absolutely even the number 2 tight end for this team this year. He is that good as a player. But he's coming off multiple seasons with injuries, and I think there's a wide range of outcomes, okay? Because the tight end room here in Washington really isn't all that bad in terms of talent. You do have Zach Ertz, who I do think is a declining talent. Ben Sinnott, who is probably not all the way cooked yet. I think he needs a year to develop under Zach Ertz. John Bates is more of a reliable kind of blocking tight end. And then you get kind of that hodgepodge of 3 tight ends there with Armani Rodgers and Cole Turner. And Yankoff, he's an undrafted free agent, probably going to get cut. But between Rodgers and Turner, both of them are pretty darn good players, but Turner's been more reliably on the field. And if Rodgers, those injuries have really taken a toll on him, it's not impossible that he underperforms in camp and he ends up getting cut. Then we get to Chris Paul here, who was a starting guard for this team last year. I remember last year when I was warning people about Chris Paul, saying, what is Ron Rivera thinking starting this guy? And they're like, oh, well, if he's starting this year, there must be something they're seeing that you're not, Jack. Guess what? He had a 38.8 Pro Football Focus grade last year, which is about as bad as you can have. 77th among 79 interior offensive linemen. He was awful, and now the Commanders have brought in help on the interior of the offensive line. They've brought in Tyler Badass. They have brought in Michael Dieter. Okay, they have brought in these players that, have played in the league and have played better than Chris Paul. Okay, so right now the team actually lists Paul as an offensive tackle, so they're going to try to probably move him around a little bit, see if there's anything that he can do on this offensive line. But if he fails at tackle and he continues to fail on the interior, a former starting offensive lineman for this team last year is going to get cut. Then we get to Ramiz Ahmed, the kicker that this team brought in to replace Braeden McManus. And listen, Ramiz has got a good leg, okay? He had a 61-yard field goal in the USFL 2 seasons ago. He had a pretty decent season this year in the UFL, but the Commanders are bringing in kicker competition, all right? They brought in Jake Bates, who was the number 1 kicker in the UFL, in for a visit this week. They had a number of kickers come in during mandatory minicamp. Seems like neither of those guys are going to really stick. So it looks like it's going to be Ramiz Ahmed, and if they can land Jake Bates, that's who they're going to want to bring in. I actually think in that competition, Bates probably wins it because Bates hit a 64-yard field goal in the UFL this spring. And Ahmed, he's been a kicker in 1 NFL game for the Green Bay Packers, but he wasn't able to keep a job even in the UFL this year. So I think Jake Bates is the guy that the Commanders want, and if they get him, I think he's probably going to be the Week 1 starting kicker for this team. Now predict it for me down there in the comments. Will Ramiz Ahmed be the Commanders' starting kicker this year? Give me a yes or a no for today's pinned comment. YouTube's going to throw you an ad break here in just a couple of seconds, and when that happens, take advantage of that time by giving me a yes or a no. Another player that I think could get surprisingly cut is Efe Obada, and he's coming off a big leg injury. He has not been able to participate in the voluntary and even mandatory portions of OTAs this year. And, with them bringing in Cleveland Ferrell and them bringing in Dante Fowler Jr. and them bringing in Dorrance Armstrong and moving Jamin Davis over to the edge. And, of course, you still have KJ Henry, who we'll talk about in a little bit here, actually. When it comes to Obada, if he comes back off that leg injury and he doesn't look good, there's a chance at least that he could get cut surprisingly. Now, I think many Commanders fans expect him to be a backup on this team this year and on this defense, and he certainly could. Okay, but he's going to have to show up at camp, and he's going to have to be a pretty decent player. If he doesn't, I'm not sure if there's going to be a ton of room for him on this defensive line. Then we get to KJ Henry, who was a mid-round draft pick last year for the Commanders. He had an opportunity to really get full-time starting reps after they traded Chase Young and Montez Sweat, and he didn't play well, guys. He really didn't. Wasn't really somebody that put a lot of pressure on opposing quarterbacks, even with a lot of one-on-one opportunities. And if he has a lackluster camp, just like Efe Obada here, I do think Henry, is somebody that is going to be on the fringe of this roster for sure. Hopefully he continues to develop here, and he's somebody that can be a contributor for this team moving forward. But I'm definitely skeptical at this point, given what we saw from him last year. Then we get to Ricky Stromberg, another player taken last year by Ron Rivera in this former regime that just didn't really seem to work out. As a day 2 draft pick here, he came in and he was awful. All right, a 44.5 Pro Football Focus grade. Not as bad as Chris Paul, give him that. But, that's not saying much, man. And, he's somebody that, heading into year 2, you're hoping develops. But, this regime made a point to go out and get Tyler Badass, to go out and get Nick Allegretti. And, and to go out and get Michael Dieter, who I think is better than Ricky Stromberg. So I do think Ricky needs to really turn it up here during training camp, and it's going to be a big year for him. Then we get to Braeden Daniels here, who can play guard, he can play tackle, but, maybe he's just an athletic freak that doesn't really have a defined skill set. He missed his entire rookie season with an injury. He's coming in this year. Is he going to be able to find a home? Now, he's got the physical, skill set to find a home somewhere on this offensive line, but he's very raw. He was raw coming out of school last year, and he didn't have that crucial rookie year of development. So without that development, how does he look this year? If he doesn't look good, I do think that there is a decent chance that he doesn't make the roster this year. Then Dax Milne, I think there's a number of receivers that I could have put on this list here, but Milne is somebody that's been on this roster. He's played a relatively, maybe not significant, but he's had a role on this team. He's been a special teams contributor. But, with all the talent that they have at the wide receiver position now, they brought in Luke McCaffrey, they brought in Olamide Zaccheaus, they brought back Jamison Crowder, who is a really good punt returner. I'm just not sure if Milne has a role to fill here on this team anymore. Now, maybe I'm wrong. Obviously he had that great season with Zach Wilson there at BYU. He was his #1 target, but since entering the National Football League, he hasn't really been much. I think Jamison Crowder's a better punt returner. So I wouldn't be surprised whatsoever if Milne ends up getting the boot. Now, that'll be it for today's edition of the Commanders Report. If you're a real one and you made it to the end of today's show, I greatly appreciate all your support, guys. Make sure you type those real ones down there in the chat in all caps. If you made it to the end, to identify yourselves, I want to see who all my real ones are down there in the comments.